after this one. Okay, so as everybody knows, it's APAHM, and we want to discuss what exactly is APAHM. It's Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, or Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. It was created as a political identity in the 1960s to galvanize AAPI identity.
Thanks, Nari. This is Sina, the campaign manager at SEARAC. Sorry I can't be on video with you all, but I also wanted to go ahead and help with celebrating APAHM, or Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. I'll give a little background with why we're coming together today to have a panel with Southeast Asian specific leaders and educators in our community, in ensuring that we do have visibility for this month and all the months following, and ensuring that we are seen in equity data and political identity, as well as our cultural heritage. And so just a little background with the Asian American identifier for the umbrella of how we identify. It's so important in this month and this past year during a pandemic, as well as a political upheaval and rise in anti-Asian violence, that we really talk about our cultural, political identities as Asian Americans, and more specifically as Southeast Asian Americans. And we also have very diverse countries we come from, languages, heritage. And so for this webinar, we really wanted to uplift those stories, as well as identifying that a lot of some of the violence we're seeing that the Asian American community and Native Hawaiians or Pacific Islanders may be facing due to xenophobia and due to also racial injustice and racism, is that there is a clumping of our of all of our identities. And so just as context, in the 1960s, a lot of Asian American students organized with in solidarity with other racial groups and civil rights movement leaders. And so the term Asian American came about at that time. Before then, prominent Asian groups such as Chinese Americans, Japanese Americans, Filipino Americans who arrived in the US prior to Southeast Asian Americans were considered Oriental, or their specific identities. And so during the 1960s, when there was a lot of political upheaval and push for social justice, as we're seeing today, there was a lot of solidarity work, and that term was coined, Asian Americans, to unite us, to show solidarity, as well as a collective political identity that we do have, organizing, mobilizing, and racial solidarity. And so that's how the term came about. And today we're seeing that with a lot of our identities coalesce, that there's also a need for visibility of our very specific needs and different cultural identities. And so we hope with today's panel, we'll be able to celebrate and really talk about what it means to be Southeast Asian American today. All right, and so we'll just get right into the panel. Thank you so much for going over policy updates, Nari, and apologies again for the delay in getting the visual slides to everyone and making sure that we all can follow along together. So we'll go ahead and launch it off with our speakers today. We have wonderful speakers from our community, really prominent and longstanding leaders, and the work they do are so important. I'll go ahead and pass it to Nari to give us a panel introduction.
Great, thank you so much, Tina. So our first speaker today will be Asa Chao, and his pronouns are he, him. He's from the Southeast Asian American Education Coalition and Student Support and Funding Services at Highline College. We're also going to hear from Lisa Yang. Her pronouns are she, her, from Freedom Inc. We're also going to hear from Dr. Nhan Thanh. His pronouns are he, him, from the Vietnam Agent Orange Relief and Responsibility Campaign, Mekong NYC, and also the Southeast Asian Defense Project. And we'll also hear from Sarath Suong. His pronouns are he, him, from the Southeast Asian Freedom Network. And then lastly, we're going to hear from Suong Bujri. Her pronouns are she, her, from SEAC Village.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Asa Chao, he, him pronouns, as mentioned. Thank you, Nari, for the introductions. Glad to be here. Here, just want to share a little bit about kind of my journey as a Min American and the importance of our Southeast Asian heritage and history, right? As we're all grappling today, in struggle, in solidarity with our communities. I think understanding ourselves, for me, it's been a defining moment. I like to call this like my genesis moment, was really understanding who I was. And for me, I grew up in Portland, Oregon. And I was born there in 1979, and there was a project called Halsey Square, also called Rose City. And it was a place where most of our Min refugees came. I wouldn't say there was probably around 1,000 of us who were in that apartment project. And it was a wonderful place, meaning the Min community was there. We hanged out all the time. The kids hanged out and the parents and families hanged out. It felt like a village because it was a village. At the same time, what I also witnessed living there was that I often saw violence, I saw poverty. And during the nights where my usual Saturday nights where my aunts and uncles would hang out and my parents would hang out, there was laughter, yes, but there was also a lot of tears, right? And as a kid growing up, I always wondered why. Why is mom crying? Why is auntie crying? There was a lot of pain. And I never understood why. They never shared with me the pain and the tears and why they had them. But that was constantly on my mind. And as I gone through my K-12 experience, never did I have a school teacher or counselor reach out and try to understand the community. And I felt very invisible, right? I think that's a common experience that a lot of us have, feeling invisible. No one knew who Min people were, right? No one knew. And I always had to explain myself, educate my classmates, my teachers, my counselors, and it was very challenging. But it wasn't until I went to college where I met my supervisor and mentor. Her name was Sho Shijioka. She worked as the coordinator of the Asian Pacific American Education Office. I walked in there one day. I didn't have much money for college, so I was looking for scholarships. And she went right out and introduced herself. And next thing I knew, I was working for her as a work study student. And I remember one day she asked me, hey, and we talked about helping our students and reaching out to the community, but can you tell me a little more about your experience as a Min American? And what are issues or barriers that exist that make it challenging for Min people to succeed in our education system? And she's like, hey, can you provide me a report, like a 1-pager or 2-pager about that? I was like, sure, for sure. I will definitely get you the report. I was like, I'll get to you in a couple of days. A couple of days passes by. 4 days passes by. A week, 2 3 weeks passes by. She doesn't receive anything. She must be thinking, hey, Ace slacking off. He hasn't submitted his work. But what happened during those weeks was I was in the computer lab researching about the Min history and our strength as a people coming and surviving the war in Laos, the secret war in Laos. and coming to the States, I handed her about 3 weeks later a report that was a 37-page report. It was titled Men and Higher Education. That was my defining moment. And what happened during that time was that I discovered who I was. And I was an undecided major at the time. It was my second year at Oregon State University. And at that time, I knew what I wanted to be. I knew what I wanted to do for the most part. I'm still kind of trying to figure that out, not right now, but I knew what I wanted to do. Right? And I was a geology major. I love geology. I love learning about comets, right? And any geology major or astrophysics major knows that if you're looking at comets, like maybe watching like a movie where there's a comet streaming past the sky, you might be wondering if it's going to hit Earth or hit Jupiter or whatnot. You can figure out where it's going to go by figuring out its 2 points, right? One from the past and where it is today. Once you have those 2 points, you'll know where it's going to go. Same thing with our own life and our journey. Same thing with our own journey. You figure out where you'll go once you figure out where you come from. And that's what the Southeast Asian, the Min heritage, when I learned about my heritage and culture, that's what really helped me define my journey and where I knew I was going to go. That's also when I learned as well too and realized the history that my mom and my family and the Min community, what they've gone through. I understood the tears. I understood why a lot of people in my family, my community, did not graduate from high school, did not go to college. Understood why there was violence, why there were gangs. There was this, not just Southeast Asian, but Southeast Asian American and this big, huge American history of white supremacy, of racism that has colonized our countries and really discriminated, disseminated us to the very teeth, right? Touching on that today, the trauma that we see too, right? The murders of our Asian sisters in Atlanta. We must also understand the history behind it. That wasn't just by coincidence. We all know that whether it is what we learned in our history is that whether we're deemed as a model minority to wedge between ourselves and other BIPOC communities, to use and divide and conquer us, or whether we're seen as the perpetual foreigner or the invaders, in this case, more recently, the virus, right? These historical modes that they kind of pin us to has been something that's been repeated over and over and over in Asian American history and also Southeast Asian American history as well. So, and that's why, unfortunately, the traumas that we have experienced in the past still move forward today, but we can be so much empowered. And for me as a Mid-American, you know, I had this greater understanding and greater awareness, but also greater responsibility to really move forward with that. And so that's the power that it brings. And with that as well too, just to kind of mention a little bit about the organization I'm with. I'm with the Southeast Asian American Education Coalition. I also work at Highline College as the dean, one of the dean of students there. But for speaking about the Southeast Asian American Education Coalition, or we just refer to as SEED Coalition as for short, what our organization has been doing the past 9 years, is really trying to advocate for data disaggregation visibility. Because before SEED existed in the state of Washington, there was a common lumping of all Asians together, right? And we know what that means. That often hides the traumas and realities of our people, right? That we are the model minority, there are no issues, trauma does not exist, you are successful, right? And so we saw that kind of repeat itself over and over in educational institutions. And so what we did was, due to our work, and we hosted events, forums for our community and coming together to have these discussions. And we had summits for our community to bring visibility. And that's why it's so important. And think about what's happening recently in our communities. Now more than ever, we need that. We need community to come together to understand process and process on our own way. We decide how we move forward, right? Not them. We decide what next steps we need to take, always with the value of solidarity and care for one another. So, but yeah, I didn't want to take too much time. This is a little bit about me and the work, just a little bit about our SEED Coalition, the work we've done. And I just want to thank you everyone for being here, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, A. And I did want to ask another question regarding your work doing disaggregated data in Washington State. Since Heat Coalition has done a lot of impactful work around data equity and data disaggregation in Washington State, can you share the importance of this work in making Lu Mein and Southeast Asian American community needs more visible and helping to ensure our students receive equitable opportunity and the resources they need to succeed?
Yeah, thank you, Nari, for that question. One example I want to bring up, because I will paint probably a better picture for our Nguyen and other Southeast Asian communities in the state of Washington. We have a strong Asian community, but if you look at all of our work we have, because we have amazing programs and initiatives in our state that serves our BIPOC community. But one of the things I realized when I moved to Washington State in 2007, and I was a grad student through the multicultural ed program at University of Washington. And in that university, we had these centers for these outreach centers for different BIPOC communities, but they didn't have any for our Asian community, nothing for our Southeast Asian community. So one of the examples kind of demonstrates the work we've done, and why it's so important is that there was a lot of work being done to advocate, to create an educational pipeline from K-12 to higher ed, and provide our communities, provide the BIPOC communities educational opportunities and success, right? But that didn't exist for our Southeast Asians. So one of the first things we did as an organization was we asked, why doesn't this exist? Your organization, University of Washington, which is our flagship college in our state of Washington, states you care about these values, right? And this is really important when we talk to our allies, and you all probably have experiences, they leave Southeast Asians out of the conversations. Sometimes they lump Southeast Asians into the white category. Right? You see that in the reports, you probably heard it in conversations. So the important thing that what our SEAC Coalition did is dismantle that narrative. Because when you don't present the narrative, they control the narrative. Right? And sometimes that happens with our allies too. So we want to make sure that we educate them as well, right? With care and love, right? And allyship and accomplishment, right? But that's what we did. And what happened from that, through advocating, hosting our summits, meeting with the University of Washington president and the board, was that they created a Southeast Asian American recruiter position, the first ever at University of Washington to reach out to our Southeast Asian students, have college access events, help students apply, help students finish their federal financial aid application. And that was big, and it had a ripple effect. Washington University ended up doing that too. They ended up collecting disaggregated data on our different Southeast Asian populations and provided reports on that as well, on their enrollment rates, retention, and graduation rates. And that way, our organization, among others, were able to advocate for additional funding and support for sustained efforts and sustained interventions. And not to mention just capacity building. There were a lot of professional development opportunities that we provided the campus and other places. So what it did in our state was set a movement. Whether you visited University of Washington or other state schools, or even the college, I work at Highline College and other community and technical colleges in our system, now they have a platform for conversation. So they can't say anymore that we don't know how Min people are doing. We don't know how Hmong people are doing because we don't collect the data. Now they know. Once they have the data, we can definitely hold them accountable to make sure they fulfill their duty as public servants and educators. That's key, right? And for you and me and our cousins, nieces, grandchildren and children, we want to make sure that we hold them accountable. Because in the past, we know they haven't, right? They haven't been held accountable. They haven't even looked. They didn't even know we existed. So we got to counter that narrative. So that's, I would say, overarching. That's the work we've been doing.
Thank you so much, for that very thorough response. And thank you for all the work that you've done for our community and advocacy and furthering the movement for disaggregated data across the state of Washington and in the nation. Next up, we're gonna have Lisa Aya Yang as our next speaker, and pronouns are she, her. And Lisa was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin by her Hmong refugee parents. As a child who survived domestic violence and white supremacist violence, They knew that in whatever work that they were in, they dreamed of spaces that truly loved people instead of harming and shaming them. As a community power building lead, they bring this into their work through pushing against white supremacist, patriarchal, and capitalist methods that shame and harm Black and Southeast Asian families. They continue to organize political power around city budgets through weeks of actions, canvassing, holding community meetings, supporting mutual aid in order to divest from the police and instead invest in community care. Thank you for being here with us, Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. Yes, my name is Lisa Elia, and everything you said is basically what I do. I am a community power builder, and essentially my role is to shift the money in the budget into the police, into our community, and really centering the narratives and the stories of poor Southeast Asian people, queer folks, and showing that our people have power in deciding, and we know what we want in our community. We don't need officials to decide what they think is best for us. We are our own experts, and we already know what are the problems that we're dealing with. We just need that money to be invested into us. And so that's some of the work that I'm doing right now. I'm really excited to be here with everybody who's on this panel. Y'all are all amazing, so I'm really excited for that.
Thank you so much. And for our first question, I wanted to ask, can you share what it was like for you growing up Hmong and how important it was for your heritage to be represented and celebrated? For example, in what ways was it not that may contribute to the invisibility, minority myth, and or anti-Asian violence of today?
Thank you for this question. I struggle a lot with thinking about how we use heritage and like different words and stuff, because I think much of these things we practice and value and remember that we count as heritage hurts non-binary queer people, hurts survivors, refugees, people who don't fit in. I think that's the constant narrative I've felt growing up as an Asian person, and so I just think about what is heritage, what is this inheritance, this legacy of mine, and what does it look like in real life? Because I feel like it's been warped for us to see what heritage is for us. So yeah, I think oftentimes like our representation in the mainstream or whatnot is co-opted and seen as like to seek validation for white supremacy, and so that's watered down, and that we're not seen as defiant people, especially as Asian people. And so I really struggle with this question, trying to think about like what does heritage look like, right? Under the context of Hmong 18 clan, white supremacy, Chinese imperialism, colonialism, genocide, what does heritage look like for me, right? And I know growing up, the only way people saw Hmong people was like our food, our clothes, and when they wanted to celebrate us, it was really surface level. Even going to like Milwaukee public schools and like having cultural days, it's just being our clothes and our food, right? But I think we are much more than our food, and especially since Hmong Day just passed, and in Wisconsin, Hmong vets are being recognized. I am thinking about the Hmong families that died during the Vietnam War and the Secret War, and just thinking about all the United States people, Hmong people included, that pretend that fighting for US militarism and imperialism is a heroic thing, is part of our heritage, right? So I think the way I want to see Hmong heritage is grounded in truth-seeking more than representation or validation. We are stories of participating, surviving Hmong AT clan, white supremacy, Chinese imperialism, and we're also stories of dreaming what that looks like outside of that, right? So me growing up as a child of a refugee in Milwaukee, I think my heritage is a history of a lot of trauma. It is a history of feeling disconnected and a very numbing childhood. I feel like I don't remember much because of just all the abuse that I experienced and the harm that I grew up with. And even other things like from my teacher yelling at me for speaking Hmong as a K4 kid, right? And like that really stunting me and like really impacting me throughout my entire life. I'm trying to think of more examples, like, and even like with Hmong families, my family being fragmented and displaced, all of that, or my family, we have 7 kids, there's a lot of us, right? And so like, when we're in public, us as Southeast Asian people taking up space, that was part of, I believe, was like our heritage, but also, you know, being shamed for taking up space. That's part of our story, like for existing. And we're only valuable to white supremacy when like we give something to them. And so there's so many examples that I have about like me growing up as a Hmong person in Milwaukee and Wisconsin, like my parents working all the time, all my family members having strokes, high blood pressure, my grandma raising me, then my siblings, and then the TV raising me, growing up in classrooms that had 40 people in it, and not a lot of them were Hmong. Like I didn't have a lot of Hmong friends or people who I grew up with. So I feel like part of my heritage is being severed from being Hmong within white supremacy and Hmong patriarchy. Like all of that is the legacy that I grew from, and the legacy of like Hmong people constantly being displaced one after another. So yeah, like reflecting back, I'm just thinking about the colonial and imperial project that has shaped my Hmongness. The trauma I grew up with didn't start when I was born, right? It was started way before I was born. It was built from legacy of violence. Like the way my dad was abusive wasn't just because of Hmong patriarchy, it was because of imperialism, it was because of genocide, right? And so I think about all of these things and what we define what heritage is. And a big part of it is our trauma, but I also feel like is also our power and love, our resilience as well. We are powerful. My heritage comes from my people's voices, from the way we protect one another, and we stand up to white men, from the way we feed each other, from the way we laugh, we sit and take care of plants, the way we mix print on print, the way we, you know, create new things because we're always being moved and displaced. My heritage is when we defy, you know, we just do us, no matter how angry white supremacists or patriarchal people get. When we move and don't like give any fucks about validation, like that for me is also part of Hmong heritage. And when we roll deep at restaurants, 20, 40 of us, and we take up space, we assert ourselves for housing and not being separated, when we assert ourselves for not one of us to be lost with militarism or playing loud music or just all these things. All of these things remind me of like Hmong heritage. And so this is the heritage I continue to seek out and move with. I believe that the way mainstream Asian Americans, and just like the way it's been said and talked about, is very anti-Black and anti-Asian, and especially how sometimes we celebrate Asian American Pacific Islander Month can be anti-Black and anti-Asian. So we really need to think about how we can reimagine what heritage looks like for us, and demand more for ourselves. Yeah, so I'm just saying, like, if we're going to celebrate ourselves, we must remember like the lessons of imperialism and genocide, capitalism, all of that. And also like our food, our life, all of that growing up, everyone loved it. People loved it when my mom like brought egg rolls to her school, but they didn't really care about her. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, I want to be able to build a world that continues to search for truth in our stories, so that our stories are represented correctly, not just represented. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for your vulnerability and the abundance of strength that you just shared with us. That just like brought me emotional too, like relating to like all those struggles that we've been through collectively as Southeast Asians. So thank you so much. And now I'm gonna go forward. Unfortunately, we don't have as much time, but we're gonna go forward to our next speaker, Syarat Sarinai Suong. His pronouns are he, him. He's the national director of SEAFN. And Syarat was born in the Kawadang refugee camp after his family fled Cambodia's civil war. They resettled in his hometown of Revere, Massachusetts, where he learns about community organizing as a working class queer refugee. Syarat attended Brown University in Rhode Island, where he majored in ethnic studies with a specific focus on Southeast Asian resettlement, resilience, and resistance. He became a co-founder and former executive director of Providence Youth Student Movement, also known as PRISM, a community organization of Southeast Asian young people, queer and trans youth of color, and survivors of state violence organizing collectively against state violence. Syarat is a founding co-chair of the Alliance of Rhode Island Southeast Asians for Education, or ARISE, a local youth organization fighting for education justice. Syarat sits on the advisory board of the Immigrant Justice Network, a network of immigrant justice groups dedicated to thriving communities free from policing, deportation, and imprisonment. And he is the national director of Southeast Asian Freedom Network, SEAFN, a movement family of Southeast Asian grassroots organizations founded to fight against detention and deportation. Syarat loves his family, friends, young people, and is the biggest X-Men geek you'd ever meet.
Thank you, Nadi. Wow. Okay, that was a pretty extensive bio. So I'm gonna just try to take condense as much as possible. In fact, thank you, Lisa. It would be great to actually hear you talk all night. Thank you for being shared. Okay, so yeah, hey everybody, my name is Sarath, yeah, I'm a Khmer refugee. I'm queer. My family resettled in Boston. That's where I got this accent. But I eventually made home here in the Ocean State in Rhode Island, and here I'm based. And I get to be the honor and the privilege of being the national director for SEAFN. And so some of the questions that were asked, sort of what was it like growing up Khmer? You know, and I like many other Southeast Asian refugees, I was, and especially in the Boston area during the 90s, it wasn't easy. You know, like we said, like, you know, our parents were so traumatized they couldn't talk about why we were here. The police harassed us when we were hanging out in our neighborhoods. The teachers pushed us out of schools, and then we were funneled into prisons and then into the deportation pipeline. And really, community organizing sort of saved my life, in that it was able to help me understand what was going on around me, to be able to navigate, but also more importantly, really how to build space and build a movement that could really change the conditions that we were living in. Yes, I came to Providence for college, and then stuck around to help on PRISM, and really sort of helped to build a movement here. Really look at, we were first sort of looking at dismantling the gang database. The Providence Police Department in the 80s and 90s created the gang database and the gang unit to survey and profile Southeast Asian young people. And I think that's a story for a lot of Southeast Asian communities across the country. And now as a national director of Southeast Asian Freedom Network, I'm able to help coordinate and help build movements and organizations that are doing the frontline deportation defense work in our communities. As far as, you know, I think in terms of representation, you know, we've been here for 46 years. And upon arrival, really, we were lumped under the model minority myth. We were lumped as a model minority under Asian Americans. And, you know, as we all know, the model minority is so harmful and actually doesn't represent us and visibilizes our trauma. And the idea that all Asians are successful does not apply to our communities, especially if you look at the data. And, you know, so we know that Southeast Asians are the myth in the model minority, right? And I wasn't going to resettlement, but I think we all know that. So I guess I think what I want to say is this. I think growing up Khmer in Boston, growing up queer and poor and working class was tough. But I think, you know, when we were resettled here, we tried our best to survive. And when we, you know, and when we were faced the individual form of anti-Asian hate of racism, every day, just from walking to school, everything from sort of being called names, from being picked on, to, in my neighborhood, in my community in Revere in the 90s, there were so many, there was fires lit in the homes of Cambodian refugee families, right? This is those kind of violence. And we came together to form community to protect each other. Then we were called gangs, right? And then we were called gangs, and then we were pushed into prisons. And so I wanted to say for my generation as a Cambodian American who came here as a refugee kid that it was hard. And a part of that is really understanding that that we came at sort of a perfect storm in the US in terms of criminalization of poor people or refugees or Black folks. And that, you know, for me then in thinking about how to transform and how to work around what's happening in my community was then to be able to say, we actually have to organize. We have to organize against these very systems that made us refugees in the first place. Yeah, so that's sort of my quick thing, Lisa. Sorry, Nari.
Thank you, Syarat. And thank you for doing the work for other Khmer folks. And my next question for you is, you touched on this a little bit, that SEAFN has been leading the anti-deportation and intersectionality solidarity movement in the Southeast Asian community for many decades. Could you share with us what has been the greatest challenges in addressing deportation and why it's so important to have Khmer and Southeast Asian leadership in immigrant and racial justice movements?
Wow. Okay, I'm gonna try. I'm probably not gonna answer that, but I think I'll attempt to sort of talk a little bit about some of the things I'm seeing. You know, I think Southeast Asia as a region is more than just Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam, right? And I think for us, what was really important to build an identity, a political identity for Southeast Asian Americans, and that includes both communities, tribes, folks who were displaced or became refugees as a result of U.S. militarism in our home countries, our homelands, right? And I think that that's really important because I think it sort of gives us an opportunity to really meet the specific needs of refugees that came from there. But as an organizer and as a movement builder, I think that it's also actually the political identity gives us a way forward, right, in terms of organizing. So that means that for the past few decades, we've been building this identity to make sense of our position in U.S. racial capitalism, right? The refugees, we came here, we had to understand how we fit into the system, and also really our position in the movement against it, right? And so we built this identity to name U.S. imperialism as perpetrators of violence against us and the cause of our homeland's destruction, right? And so this identity is important for us to create a new way forward for us as refugees, and really to make sense of why we are here and what we need to do and where we go forward from here. Part of like the challenge and the tension with that then is that it compels us to be able to really tear down these very systems, right? And so for SEAFN, it's been really important to really build to build a movement and political identity towards a world without war, without military, without imperialism, right? And that means that we have to push our people and our communities and our families and our neighborhoods and our friends towards a future without this, towards abolition. SEAFN was formed in 2001 to create a united front against the deportation of Cambodian folk. And to this day, we're trying to think about, okay, we can and we will stop the deportation of Cambodian folks, of folks in South Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam, right? But what is that? Is that really our end game? Once we win that, then what is next for us as South Asian refugees in this country? And I think that it's hard, and I think it's very hard. It's difficult for me. It's difficult for many of us to really think about what a world could look like that doesn't have prisons or that doesn't have police. And I think, if anything, you know, the movement for Black Lives and Black leaders and organizers have gifted us with such an opportunity right now, and have made such headway into really asking us to imagine what this world could look like. And I think part of the challenge for us, for me, really, is how do we move our people towards that side and towards this world. Yeah, so you know, and I think that I just also want to say another challenge is that you know, we really have to think about deportation and the work and our own movement against it as also a queer and gender justice issue. That since you know, that from the get, you know, that movement, and not just for SEAFN, but also really in our communities when we were struggling here the first few years, it was really queer folks and femme folks and women folks who actually stood up, who rose up and defended our communities and built the community institutions that we needed to survive. And you know, for SEAFN, we built our movement and we built our work to understand that deportation and abolition is a queer and gender justice issue. And that even though most of the people with deportation orders are cis men, it is really women, femme, and queer folks that had to pick up the pieces in our families and our communities after deportation, and also do the organizing work to defend our brothers and our fathers and our husbands. And so I want to encourage us to really think about deportation as also a queer and gender justice. So much more to say, but we have lots of great folks after me.
Thank you so much, Sarath. That was awesome. Thank you so much for the work that you do all the time. And our next speaker that we're going to be featuring on our panel is Suong Bujri. Her pronouns are she, her, and she is a community power building leader at SEAC Village. Suong Bujri was born in Vietnam and lived in a refugee camp in Cambodia for 2 years, and resettled in Greensboro, North Carolina at the age of 6 with her family in 2002. Suong's gender pronouns are she, her. Suong is Montagnard, specifically from the Bunyong Mong tribe, an indigenous group found in the central highlands of Vietnam. North Carolina has the largest Montagnard community outside of Southeast Asia. She studied at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, and graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and International Studies in 2017. She volunteers extensively with the Montagnard Dega Association, promoting cultural preservation, research, and education. Suong has been with SEAC Village for the past 2 years at the statewide base building organizer as the statewide base building organizer. SEAC Village is a grassroots-led social justice organization serving Southeast Asian and Black communities in the South. She organizes civic engagement and policy campaigns with partners across North Carolina, building power in our communities and uplifting the voices of marginalized people.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you so much for having me, or allowing me to be part of this panel discussion. I'm so grateful to share space with everyone this evening and to be part of a panel with folks that I admire and look up to.
We're so happy you're able to join us too soon. And my first question for you, can you share what it was like for you growing up Montagnard and how important it was for your heritage to be represented and celebrated?
Yeah, of course. I think that I'm still on this journey of coming home and finding myself. So I still struggle with what even to call myself, but I think right now, Montagnard Benong, or like Montagnard Benong Indigenous, sounds good to me, and it feels right. So a bit of context: Montagnard is a French colonizer term that lumps all of the Indigenous tribes in the Central Highlands together. There are many Indigenous tribes. The big tribes resettled in North Carolina are Ade, Jarai, Kaho, Banad, Benong, which is my tribe. My family and I came to the US in the third Montagnard refugee wave. So in 2002, which was about 900 folks, we came due to protests over land rights and religious freedom that occurred in 2001. In our community, land is super important. My family's or my family are farmers. And so land has been passed down for us for generations. So I think this all stems from history of colonization and the war in Southeast Asia, right? Montiar folks were recruited by US Special Forces. They fought in the war because there were promises of autonomy. However, the war led to destruction of 80% of our village land, the prohibition of teaching our own languages and our property rights taken from us, and then forced assimilation into the mainstream Vietnamese culture. After the war, actually, a lot of our folks, about 17,000 folks, stayed in the jungle for 14 years, fighting a war that, you know, had already ended and on a promise that was already forgotten. So with all that said, I think a lot of my heritage was taken from me. I think my family was resettled in North Carolina, and growing up in the South had its challenges. We were resettled in like low-income neighborhoods consisting of Black and Brown communities. So the neighborhoods had high police presence, school didn't receive adequate funding in a city that didn't care to like see us. So an example is like we got Vietnamese interpreters at doctor's visits when Montiar folks speak different languages and have a different history and culture. So growing up, I was pretty timid. I really didn't think my voice mattered. And for a long time, I think I was told that my voice didn't matter. And so I was really uncomfortable with myself and my emotions, didn't really know myself, my history, and I think was really lost trying to be someone that didn't feel right to me. And then like, I think also growing up in the South, like history class around the Vietnam War was for half a day and like centered the US, when I truly believe that we're not supporting characters. We should be centered because this happened to us and on our land and our homes, right? But growing up was also really fun. I remember picking like wild blueberries with other children and mashing it with peppers and going bamboo shoot picking with my mom. So gardening, like right now, is so important for our communities here. And so like being back home in Greensboro reminds me a lot of the village and the homeland. North Carolina has the largest community of Montiards outside of Southeast Asia. It's guesstimated to be 10 to 14,000, which was also why like us writing in our ethnicity was so important in the 2020 census. A lot of our culture lives within the church. And so the Bible and our hymnals are only written things that we have in Benong. I think all this to say that like, I think it's so important to celebrate and honor my heritage. And when I think about my identity and why I choose to hyphenate, I don't want to erase parts of me or forget my ancestors and my history. And the importance of my heritage being represented is so vital because we're like minorities within the minorities within the minority, and like the potential is extinction. And so that's why it's so important for me to fight against the erasure on all the levels, right? There's erasure historically and erasure now, even in the US, with terms like AAPI and like whose stories are being told. And so I hope that answers the question. And I think that also is why I really value and appreciate the work that SEAC Village does.
That was great. Thank you so much, Suong. And that leads me to my next question about SEAC Village. I know that they have been leading interracial coalition building and anti-racist training for many years in the South. Could you share with us what has been the greatest challenges in building racial solidarity and why it's important to have Montagnard representation leading in the Southeast Asian movement spaces?
Yeah, I think that some of the greatest challenges in building racial solidarity work is the unlearning, learning, and the transformations as like individuals and as a community. It is so needed to like be authentically there and to show up for our communities. An example is like for our Southeast Asian communities to really unpack what it means to be safe and safety and policing. I think like growing up, you know, I was taught like many others that police protect you. However, the experience for a lot of our Southeast Asian youth here, especially our cis males, is that they experience policing in very similar ways to our Black youth. So in the beginning of SEAC history, a lot of our work was around supporting our youth and their families navigating through the criminal justice systems. I think there's a lot of like uncomfortableness or challenges with ourselves and our community, and really unpacking our internalized beliefs around like model minority myth, patriarchy, like carceral logic, and like just anti-Blackness. Also like our fears around confronting the state, especially like during direct action. Like all of this visceral fear is super real. Like our experience with the police and our past traumas are real. But I think it's so important in recognizing that we are all in the system and there's privileges, and as oppressed groups, we can have privileges and also oppress others. And a good example that may help folks is like in North Carolina, recently SB 439 was introduced, which is like a hate crimes prevention act. And in light of the anti-Asian violence nationwide, right? And I think we all want safety and protection. However, we must recognize that we can't and should not scrape for things in a system that was never built for us at the expense of another group, right? Hate crime legislations are reactionary. They center policing as a solution and call for more money and resources towards policing, which eventually targets Black communities. And so for us to reject the model minority myth is to show up for our Black community, to reject the systems that pits us, and to make sure we stand in solidarity. And why it's really important for us to have like Montier folks and just Southeast Asian folks in general. I think that I truly believe that our freedoms are tied to one another, and we all have a role to play in this, and we all have stake in this. And so it's really important for us to show the power that like we're here, to show our communities that we're here, to also show to not scrape and grasp for small things and throw other marginalized communities under the bus, because that's literally how this system thrives. And so when we make room for each other, when folks are representative, when we can be unapologetically authentic and ourselves, that's so important, and we're stronger together. So we definitely have to choose all of us, right? But yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much, Suong. I really liked how you said that anti-hate crime legislation is reactionary, because that's so true in the visual that you gave to us regarding how investing in hate crime legislation is just gonna harm Black communities was really important to mention. So thank you so much. And we're gonna go to our last but not least, our speaker, Dr. Nhan Thanh, and his pronouns are he, him. Dr. Nhan has a PhD in linguistics and is a fellow in Vietnamese Nam Studies and Folk Music Studies of the Center for Vietnamese Philosophy, Culture, and Society of Temple University, and a visiting scholar at New York University Linguistics String Project. Dr. Nhan is a co-coordinator of the Vietnam Agent Orange Relief and Responsibility Campaign. He currently teaches Dan Tran, which is a Vietnamese 16-string zither at the Folk Arts Cultural Treasures Charter School in Philadelphia. He is a board member of Mekong NYC, Southeast Asian Defense Project, and the Institute for Vietnamese Cultural and Education. He is also vice president of Yes We Can Music, LLC, who's a member of Peeling the Banana from 1995 to 2003, vice president of Vietnamese Non-Preservation Foundation from 1999 to 2007. And in the past, Dr. Nhan was a co-member of the Standing Committee of the Union of Vietnamese in the US from 1972 to 1977, a Central Committee member of the Association of Vietnamese in the US from 1977 to 1995, a member of the Committee in Solidarity with Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos from 1978 to 1985. Thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Nhan.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Asa Chao, Lisa Young, Sarath Suong, and Sun Bujri. Amazing. You all have said most of what I want to say. I'm honored to be here with SEARAC and all the panelists during the AANHPI Heritage Month and the 46th anniversary of settlement in the United States by the Southeast Asian Americans. I will try to be short. I am the oldest here. I was born during the French colonialism. I got the USAID Leadership Scholarship in 1968 to San Jose in the US. Martin Luther King was assassinated in April. I read his speech Beyond Vietnam a year earlier. And in 1972, a close friend of mine was deported and assassinated on the way. Basically, heritage is activism. I found that in order to become a country, many people must have sacrificed, and the community at the village level are the units that know how to protect everybody, the land and the livelihood. They bound together into a country. We have to learn from them and to apply it for ourselves in the US. The practices are immersed in custom and festival to imbue the children the love of our people, the community, and our country. We are now the parents. We have the responsibility to continue their fine heritage. If you look at the custom and culture of our people, you'll find that they are extremely effective and radical. It is true self-determination. The most important aspects of our people's culture and custom are they don't rely on or relish on the praises and dismisses of others, like moral minority or invisibility, or both. We also need to celebrate the achievement of our youth, working to improve our communities during festival and holiday gathering. Basically, we can name history, this history of Asian Americans, Southeast Asian Americans are anti-Asian violence. The US Cold War was fully supported by soldiers and personnel of the Republic of Vietnam and the Laos and Cambodian pro-US governments. They lost everything. People are suffering immensely, more than US veterans. We should be considered the same as US veterans, deserve the veterans-like benefits. Instead, our former leaders of the Southeast Asian communities in the US did not see this and left the communities still suffering in squalid poverty. Lisa, the illnesses of the Hmong you cited, and the Vietnamese Americans are part of the 15 illnesses from Agent Orange by the US Veterans Affairs. A bit of history of Agent Orange. Agent Orange is a name representing a series of defoliation found by the US during the Second World War to deal with jungles in Southeast Asia battlefront. It contained most toxic chemical found by human being, the dioxin. The US later found the atom bombs. The US dropped the bombs on the Japanese. So both deadly weapons found by the US were used on Asians. In 1960, in order to deal with the guerrilla, President Kennedy brought out Agent Orange. The Defense Department warned the possibility of violation of international law. Kennedy had the South Vietnamese President Nguyen sprayed it in 1961 until the Saigon military overthrew and the US overthrew Nguyen. The US then took over in 1963 until the pressure from the US public and scientists was too big. President Nixon stopped it in 1971. The Saigon government of South Vietnam took over until 1975. It was also used in Cambodia and Laos as an extension of the war in Vietnam. devastation on peoples and environment was studied and published in Laos in 2019. From 1961 to 71, approximately 19 million gallons of 15 different herbicides were sprayed over the southern region of Vietnam. 2021 is the 2021 is the 50th anniversary of the first spraying of Agent Orange and the 40th anniversary of the last spraying of Agent Orange in Vietnam. So I will stop here a little bit and hopefully the history of Agent Orange will add it to our the history of Southeast Asian American problem.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nhan. And my question for you, as you mentioned Agent Orange and gave us the history of it, as a longtime scholar and activist in the Vietnamese community, how has the Vietnam Agent Orange Relief and Responsibility Campaign worked to address the failures of American policies that were meant to support our successful resettlement?
Yes, it is both in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, and here in these countries, among the people, among the refugees. We have to acknowledge it, and we have to see it, you know, to help our community. Sorry for 1 second. Sorry for 1 moment. I think that we have to solve this problem among our community to make sure that it will be resolved for the health and the livelihood of the Southeast Asian Americans. For example, during the 2002, President Clinton was about to initiate a program that cost about $220 million to explore the health of the Southeast Asian Americans in this country. And unfortunately, the Vietnamese elder vetoed it. So that in order to resolve this question, we have two parts. One is Southeast Asian deserve the right to be living like veterans in this country, because we were fighting for the U.S. and when the U.S. lost, it just left us with inequality, poverty. So in order to do this, we are going to have the new Bureau of Agent Orange to include Cambodia and Laos. And from now on, we'll work together to form a new Agent Orange bill that affected all our Southeast Asian countries and Americans. Sorry, 1 moment about the picture you are seeing now. The one in front of it was me. The person in the painting is a friend of mine. He was deported in 1972 and was assassinated on the way. We had a demonstration in San Francisco and commemorate his life, and we formed the Union of Vietnamese in the U.S.
Wow, thank you so much, Dr. Teacher Nhan. This is Sina again, just jumping in for Nari to want to thank all the panelists and what you shared. As an elder as a leader, as an educator, along with so many of our speakers who are representative of the power and the pride and our solidarity and support and love that we have for one another and across communities. It's such an honor for SEARAC to host each of you in sharing about your work and celebrating together today. I know when we talk about our heritage, our histories, and really want to honor our communities, survivors of our home countries and politics, that it can be very heavy. It can be very emotional. So many thanks and applause to the courage and the work that all of you undertake, and community members who do the work with you, and community leaders. We are just so proud and honored to support your work and uplift your identities that you share, that is often invisible or overlooked in a lot of what's going on in mainstream culture or our histories as Americans. And I also want to note that we really would be remiss to also celebrate the Laotian community, those also from Laos who could not be a part of the panel today. We were hoping to definitely have as many as possible from our very diverse and beautiful Southeast Asian community. And so we hope to be able to have future panelists from the Laotian community join us to share about their work in heritage as well. So I wanted to mention that. And Phoebe, if we can move to Q&A, that would be great, and welcoming Nari back as well. We're joined also by wonderful interns at SEARAC, Shania Koo and Kevin Quach, who are behind the scenes helping out. And if there are any questions in the Zoom or from the audience that they would like to extend to our wonderful panelists, we can definitely take them at this time.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, if you would like to ask a question, please click raise hand icon, which is found at the bottom of your Zoom window, and your line will be unmuted by us. And when asking a question, please remember to share your name and your pronouns if you'd like. Respect other people's viewpoints, and please share within 2 minutes, as we'd like to get as many questions in as possible before the end of our panel. And then I also just want to let y'all know, if you don't want to verbally speak your question, you can also put it in the chat box and we can read it aloud for you. And as we wait for questions to roll in from the audience, I'd like to ask a question. And this is for any of the panelists. Feel free to answer. My question is, what are some ways that Asians or Southeast Asian Americans can show up better for each other and other groups? And anyone on the panel, feel free to chime in if you'd like.
I can go. I think about this a lot because, like Sarath was talking about, it's really challenging to get our people over and to move them over. And so I think because the way Asian people are racialized, we're racialized as very, like, we're supposed to be obedient, right? And we're supposed to not defy or push back. And so one thing that took me a long time was to to build my own voice and to build my defiance against state-sanctioned violence, against anti-Blackness, anti-Asianness, and really not challenging myself on my own anti-Blackness and my own internalized anti-Asianness, on like the way I believe that, you know, we have to be successful, blah, blah, all those other things like the model minority myth. And so I think it's our duty as Asian people, as Southeast Asian people, to call in our own folks, and to organize them and to push them to becoming organizers themselves as well. Because I found it really difficult, like even in the work that I'm doing, like getting Asian Americans, even young folks, to care, right? But we see that it's so easy for Black people, Black girls, young Black and brown people to move and activate, right? And so I think it's our duty to move and activate our own people, to be disruptive as much as we can, and to push back as much as we can whenever we have the chance that we can do it. Because like someone was saying, that our community is calling for more policing. Our community is calling for more security, right? And so if no one can get our people but our own people, right? We can't ask other community members to get our people. We have to do it ourselves. And so that is something that I feel like if there's anything you leave from this, is that, you know, the time is now to really start organizing our people and pushing them to be loud, to be disruptive against our own community that fights for the police.
Thank you so much for that answer. And I do see that we have a hand raised by Sova Chana. And so I will allow you to talk now so that you can ask your question.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Nari, and my name is Pu Suvashana. I would like to begin by thanking the SEARAC for organizing many interesting events, just to shed some of the light on a lot of things that we're dealing with, very complicated, it's getting more complicated society in this great country. I also would like to take this opportunity to thank all the speakers for sharing their experience, their in-depth knowledge about what they went through. And I congratulate you all for being the voice of for all of us. And please keep up with your good work and continue to speak up and speak out, because we need all of us to continue to do this work. At least we cannot remain silent against any oppression. Just like my home country in Cambodia, when we are silent, always the most powerful people always take advantage of us, because they seem to intimidate us or oppress us in one form or another. So my question to all the speakers, maybe you can share this with me or with other listener. You know, looking back, you know, including Asia, you know, even though we're Asian, we still have a different cultural perspective. And our view, you know, we are the same, but in the meantime, we are different. You know, I'm question to you is the idea about, you know, we can build, like you mentioned, resiliency, solidarity, collectivism, whatever. But, you know, the question towards the end is the issue of how we coexist together. You know, is the American society here lately allow us to coexist, allow us to exist. You know, I was a refugee in 1975, and I see a lot of change. I see a lot of statement. I see a lot from 6, 7 presidents now. And when we move 2 feet forward, we move 4 feet backward, and it's so deep rooted in the mind of the white people. You know, I'm sorry to be open, to be so direct, but as you can see, it's so embedded in thing. You know, how you would respond to the idea of coexistence, knowing that we have a different cultural norm, cultural identity, cultural way of thinking. How you approach that in order for us to raise a better way to sustain what we've been, you know, what my generation, Dr. Nhan, you know, you've been doing some work on the orange. I myself, I work a lot on the Khmer Rouge tribunal, you know, the thing. So anyway, the issue of coexistence, I want to hear some of your speaker. How would you respond to that? Are we, you know, we look the same, but we are really different, you know? How can we coexist in these two mindset of different cultural norm, cultural identity? Can we somehow, you know, trade in or exchange or work together for our commonality as a human being? Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Yes, I think building a community is like building a country. You have to be inclusive. You have to be for the advancement and the existence of our community. That's the main thing. If we have that ideal, then we can include all the people who are doing the same thing. So we call on everybody to support our communities and to use culture as part of gathering the community together of different ideas. And if we are a country, then we have to include everybody. That's the main thing. For different Southeast Asian countries and communities, then we have to think that of the same problem that we have with this system. If we have the same problem with this system, we have to use history and culture in order to see the oppression. And if we have the same oppression, then we include each other in the same fight against that oppression. We solve that oppression, then each of our community will advance. So that is the main thing, that that in the history of our countries, it's the same thing. We have each country to defend ourselves, and each culture is the way to defend the country and to build up the children growing up to defend that country. And that we have to start from the children and doing it like our parents did in Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. How do they defend the country so many years? And doing that, we can survive, because we don't care about people praising us. We don't care about people downplay us, but we care about our community. We don't care about all the rest. That's the main thing.
Thank you for that, Teacher Nhan. And we did get another question, but we are running out of time. So we will follow up with Linda regarding their question in an email. And now I'm going to pass it on over to Sina.
Thanks so much, Nari, and questions from audience. We'll definitely collect any others that roll in to make sure our speakers receive any that were directly inquiring regarding their work or needed information for follow-up. We'll also be sharing the presentation slides, the slide deck, as well as resources after the call to participants. We wanted to, before we go, in sharing so much and learning so much from the wealth and experiences of the leaders in our community, from Lisa and Suong, Syarat, teacher Nhan and A, that we connected to policy impact as well, and political types of power and representation. And so we are excited for next month to launch a education data equity campaign that will allow for community members and allies and partners to amplify our identities, their identities, and the solidarity work we do to ensure resources, and that our community, like so many of the speakers mentioned, have been working so hard to address the lack of resources, the disparities our communities face, the need for continued funds, resources, visibility, and political power. And Phoebe, if you're able to share by chance our page for data equity ambassadors.
Sure, just 1 second, please.
Thanks so much, Phoebe. And so this page, hopefully she'll be able to have up. We wanted to launch with all of you in advance as a part of this special celebration to sign up as Education Data Equity Ambassadors. Will be officially launching the campaign next month, but if you'd like to get started on seeing a preview of our toolkit, as well as submitting your contact information so we can make sure to share all of the campaign components where you can tap in and get involved and build your own campaigns from it as well. Hopefully we can work towards that for every month, not just for APAHM. And so this is what the page looks like. And if Shania can share the link in Zoom, we'll make sure participants have it as well on our resource doc. And so we're really excited about this, and we hope we'll have leaders here to stay in touch with and really amplify this campaign for visibility of our communities and how we can better need them, how we can better meet them, and ensure that our students are able to be successful during a pandemic and for the years to come. And so I'll go ahead and close out with inviting Nari back to have any closing remarks that she would like to share, as I'd like to celebrate as well that she will be leading our next webinar as well. And so thank you, Nari, for holding it down. And for our speakers, again, this is Sina. I'm so honored to share the space with everyone. We'll share the resource doc for our panelists' contact information and those links to stay involved and get involved with all the campaigns and organizations that was shared today.
Thank you so much, Sina. Yeah, I just want to echo and say thank you so much to everybody. I will be now hosting the future webinars that SEARAC holds, so I'm looking forward to getting to know everyone better. And this isn't the last you'll see of me. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful evening.